Welcome to Amber's Painting Chronicles, where I try to recreate Bob Ross's paintings. And so without further ado, I started by painting the canvas with the liquid white off screen just to save some time. I showed you my palette mainly because of the dreaded titanium white. Some of the paints I already had and some were brand new specifically for these paintings, as in this whole series. I found that my older paints had separated, and due to this, the thin oil came out first and the pigment last. So when mixing them back together, I got a thin diluted paint. I'm focusing on the thickness of the paint because it's rather important to the wet-on-wet method of painting that Bob Ross uses. I had no idea how important this was. As aforementioned, it would cause me a lot of problems later as the titanium white was oily and would thin out my other colors, encouraging them to mix with the lower layers of paint. I have very limited experience with oil paints, and this is only my second time using them. I should point out here that I went into this one without watching the video in advance, which I would definitely not recommend. I of course have watched Bob Ross episodes before, so I had a good idea of what to expect and have learned some basic techniques that I've used in painting acrylics in the past. I was listening to the audio but had to pause often to look at the screen, which I did not do often enough. It would have gone by much faster if I had pre-watched the original video. So back to the painting. I bought several brushes in each size to reduce the need to wash the brushes as often, but with most cheap art supplies, it quickly backfired, with the bristles shedding everywhere. So I began to attempt to get them out of the paint, which was a futile effort. And I was using the palette knife to paint, which was much harder than I expected. The bead of paint was just unwilling to adhere to the canvas. I got it to kind of work, but as you can see, it's the part that took me the longest to complete. I bought several brushes in each size to reduce the need to wash the brushes as often, but with most cheap art supplies, it quickly backfired, with the bristles shedding everywhere. So I began to attempt to get them out of the paint, which was, of course, a futile effort, and they are appearing in every single layer onwards. I can explain why magically my trees get yellow highlights. So my camera has a 20-minute max for video recording, and I didn't catch it turning off, so I lost some of the footage. Some of the greenery I was happy with on the trees, but with my white being so thin, I noticed some problems with the background later wanting to mix with the foreground. This mixing problem continued onto the shoreline plants also. The paint on the brush also seemed to glob up and want to come off in lines instead of in this nice spreaded pattern that he has. I don't have much to say about the shore. It contained a lot of titanium white, which by that time was blending with everything and was in several layers of the oil below and mixing well with everything above. If you look at his painting at this point, you kind of notice how a lot of his colors are very thick and they tend to really go on top of each other really well, and this is due to the different thicknesses of the paint with the really thin paint on the canvas. It seems to work really well together, and this is where a lot of my problems are stemming from, is this different layers of paint with the different thicknesses, and I really at this point have quite a few things that are really thinned out and not really wanting to go onto the canvas correctly. I also was still struggling to use the palette knife to paint with, so all these things kind of turned into one big problem that tells me I have a lot left to learn. It was intended to be puddles like it had freshly rained, but I painted a lake as I started my landscape higher up on the canvas than was intended for this painting, which resulted in more water at the bottom of the painting. With my plants lining the water blending so badly, I just left the shoreline exposed as I didn't know what else to do. With the final tree, I was beginning to grasp the use of the palette knife and was pleased with my tree trunk, although I forgot the highlight. That was when the mud tree made its dreaded appearance. The paint already on the canvas blended with the paint on my brush, resulting in a less than desirable color for my tree leaves. The highlights of red just added to the sludge, making it look more like clay. I noticed towards the end of this here that he adds a little more to his shoreline, and at this point I was just trying to make everything work and wasn't really paying attention very well to the video. So I completely forgot some things to my shoreline. I Pretty much added a couple little ledges here and there, trying to make it all tie in together. Overall, this was a great learning experience, and I look forward to the next one and to see how well I improve from the lessons I learned at this point.